So often in our modern day thinking, we consider fertility just something we only need to look at if we're trying to get pregnant. But fertility is an indication of peak health in both humans and animals. A healthy human should be fertile for as long as possible. This indicates optimal endocrine, metabolic, and nervous system functioning, as well as adequate to optimal nourishment. In our modern day thinking, we have reduced fertility to simply something you look at when you want to get pregnant, something we can turn on and off with chemicals, and we casually ignore warning signs from our body when our fertility, metabolic, and endocrine systems are crashing. In this episode, we will recount Alison's incredible fertility journey, what the doctors told her about her hopes of ever conceiving naturally, and what she found as a solution that I think is going to be encouraging and uplifting for you as well.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Good morning, Alison.
Hey, good afternoon, Andrea. How are you doing?
I'm well, and good morning to the listeners. Afternoon, evening, not
Night.
sure what time it is where you're
Whatever.
at. A lot of people have said, for whatever reason, a bunch of messages recently, people have mentioned that they're listening while they're washing dishes. So if you're washing the dishes, we see you.
Yeah.
And we honor you.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, this is going to be a really good episode today, Alison. You've got a review to read. So why don't you start out with that?
So let's go. Let me switch to where that is. This is a review from Apple Podcasts. It's
Awesome.
always wonderful if you have the time and the inclination to leave us a review. And this one is so enthusiastic that it really made me smile. So it's
nice.
five stars. And the person who left this review is called Full Throttle 42. And the title is Full of Goodness. It says, listening to this amazing podcast will lead to an increase of satisfaction in your belly and mind. You will have more mason jars in your fridge and on your counter, and your spouse asking, what is that bubbling thing? Your gut health will increase, as will your budget for books. Plus, you'll make more friends because you will probably start lingering at the farmer's market. This wealth of information will expand your mind and encourage you to use your kitchen more and your phone less. These ladies and their guests are a joy to listen to and so knowledgeable. I highly, in capitals, recommend. Thank you, Full Throttle 42.
Wow.
That's
we could have written a vision for the podcast, before we started. That's basically what it would have been.
It's a wonderful, wonderful review, and it made me laugh.
Yeah.
The spouse saying, "What's that bubbling thing over there?" and all the mason jars everywhere, and also
more friends.
Yeah, more
I
friends.
Like that.
Exactly. So that's a real joy to read. And hopefully, if someone is unsure whether the podcast is for them, and they read that, they might just give us a go.
Yeah. So. And now I know, Alison, you've been getting messages, and I get a message, and I know we each get a message pretty much at least every day, expressing the enjoyment and appreciation for the podcast. And those messages are so encouraging and keep us going. If you get a chance, do throw that amazing message up on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to as a review, because those reviews are probably the number one thing for helping the podcast be seen. So
indeed,
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you patrons as well for supporting us. We just put up a kind of a new thing on the Patreon, which is annual membership. So if you would like to support us at any of our 4 levels and you want to commit to supporting us for a year, you can now get a 10% discount on the sponsorship amount. So if you go to patreon.com/ancestral kitchen podcast, you will see all the levels, and you will see a little option saying if you want to come on for a year, you can get a 10% discount. That's a new thing,
That's
so
a
I just
cool
wanted to shout
feature
that out.
that,
Yeah.
Yeah, Patreon withholds that feature until you've surpassed some benchmark. We have no idea what
And we
time, number of
surpassed it.
patrons or whatever. And whatever it was, we hit it and they're like, you can have year membership. So we're very excited because I know a couple of you have asked, hey, could we do a year at a time? And so now you can.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
exactly. So
Thank
have
you
you
for your
had
support.
something
Keep the
to
podcast
eat
going.
this morning, Andrea,
I
yet?
did, happily.
Okay. What
I
did you
did.
have?
Well, I made a steamed milk because I pretty much, it's funny, perfect for the fertility episode, but I pretty much have a steamed milk every morning. And I sometimes add honey, sometimes just nutmeg, sometimes like a cinnamon oil drop. Sometimes I don't add anything. But today, Colleen made me a pumpkin spice creamer with the raw milk from our cow.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. So I had this warm,
Yum.
spicy steamed milk with the creamer steamed into it. So that was delicious.
Gosh.
And then I just heated up some of the chowder that I made a couple days ago. So for the chowder, I had roasted one of our chickens, and then, right after dinner, I put the bones from the roasted chicken in a pot, covered it in water, and it simmered. Not for overnight or anything. I just did until bedtime, basically. Um, and so I used that broth the next day to simmer a whole bunch of chopped vegetables. So some summer squash that had kind of gone a little long and was sort of big, maybe too tough to eat, like baked in a pan, and some zucchini. It was just a hodgepodge of vegetables for everybody. Like Katie gave me some corn, my neighbor gave me some squash, Melissa gave me some zucchini, like just all over the place. And then simmered all the vegetables together and then blended them in the Vitamix, poured them back into the pot, poured in all the leftover gravy from the chicken, which is made from onions from another neighbor and apples from another neighbor. And then I poured a pint of cream into the pot, and it just made, and then I had 2 more ears of corn left, and I cut the kernels off and added them to the chowder, so they're kind of like whole in the chowder.
Nice.
Does that make
Nice.
sense?
Is that what makes the chowder,
Yeah.
the corn? What's the difference between a chowder and a soup?
No idea. I just call it a chowder. I have literally no idea why.
I think some listener would
I
need
should
to
probably know that.
write to us and tell us, because
Please tell
I
us.
always associate chowder with seafood. I don't know
Me too.
why.
Me too. I just felt like if I told the kids I was making corn chowder, they'd be more interested than if I said I was making corn soup.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think you're probably
And
right.
they were. So
A chowder, what's that?
you could
That's
serve
what Gabriel
it.
would say.
Yeah, exactly. I threw in a couple like herbs and spices, but also in the gravy from the chicken, there was a lot of herbs like rosemary and things from our garden that just blended in. So it's got just insane depth of flavor. The roasted chicken.
Roasted
You know how
chicken
roasted chicken
juices.
broth is like, yeah, so good. So yeah, that was
What were you
my
going to say about
breakfast.
broth?
I just feel like roasted chicken broth is different
Yeah,
from
it is.
other chicken broths, and it's really good.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, did you eat lunch today?
Oh yeah, so you've had a really good breakfast. You should be able to go for
it was
hours
delicious.
now.
I know. Yeah, we can record all day.
Yeah.
Settle in, people.
Yeah, I have had lunch. Because we're recording on, I think it's like September the 14th today, isn't it? And Flavio, our farmer, is not back from his holidays yet. He takes a well-earned break in August, and then he starts his food kind of delivery drops again mid-September. So we are picking up some meat from him tomorrow, but I ran out from what we had from him in July. Our freezer's not very big, didn't have any meat left. And so I've been kind of eking out bits for about a week, 10 days. I had some liver pate in the freezer that I'd had and other bits and bobs. But we really kind of run out of meat earlier in the week. So this morning, when I went to the train station to take Gabriel and Rob. I always usually walk out with them early in the morning so I get some light, you know. I came back past the butcher's in the town, and they're open at 7:30. I was really surprised. I've noticed the last couple of days, you know, that they look like they're open. So I asked them, and it's yes. So I went in and bought some sausages. They are famous for their pigs. They're a particular butcher who have their own pigs and create lots and lots and lots of different fermented sausages, cured sausages, but also have fresh meat as well. So I bought some fresh sausages, and I had sausages for lunch, which is such a treat. I love sausages so much. And I cooked them in the cast iron pan with some red onion and some courgette, an extra bit of lard. And courgettes, when they're cooked with sausages in a pan like that, just all the juice from the sausage kind of soaks in, and the flavour of the onion. It was very, very good.
What's a courgette again?
Oh, zucchini.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. You've actually used the Italian word. You actually used the Italian word.
Well, it's because I'm international.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm continental.
And I had a big thick slice of spelt sourdough bread, my usual spelt sourdough whole grain, with butter on the top. We found a source of salted butter. Yeah, so salted butter on the top. And some sauerkraut. And then I roasted some cacao beans this morning. I've been wanting to do it for ages and not got to it. And so then, after lunch, I sat just on the sofa, my lunch going down, and shelled a lot of cacao beans. So I take the shells off by hand after I've roasted them. And so I had 3 or 4 of those as a kind of after-dinner treat. They're delicious.
Is it hard to take the shells off?
It depends. Most of them, once they've roasted, the shell sort of separates from the bean, and you can kind of put them in between 2 fingers and kind of twist your fingers, and the shell cracks, and then you can take the shell off.
Okay.
Some of them break while you're doing that, and you have to fish out the shell and separate the bits of bean. Some of them stay whole. Rob's quite good at making them stay whole. I'm not sure how he does it. But I haven't done it for ages, and they were absolutely just, so nice to taste fresh cacao beans again. So that was an extra special treat. It was a nice lunch.
Sounds delish.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Well, good then. We both had a good lunch.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when you said that you were eking out bits, well, that's the real ancestral.
Well, exactly.
Kitchen. There you go. Eking out
exactly.
bits.
I was just kind of using bits of broth to, then we've had some kind of, meat sustenance in the day. If we've had something with broth on, like a soup, like you had for breakfast. But then sort of putting tiny bits of meat into things. And thankfully, I made a big batch of that liver pate, as I said, before August, and I was just using it out the freezer because it's Naomi's liver pate. It goes really well in the freezer, and you can just get it out. It's as if nothing's happened to it, and you can spread it on the bread, and it's beautiful.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we froze some of that. I made a batch of her pate and froze a bunch of containers, and it came out. It thawed perfectly.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, I found with pate, if you freeze it, and then I was freezing it in small containers, and then I was bringing some to a friend, and that was perfect because it stayed cold. It started to thaw, even though it was in a cooler, but it stayed cold until she got it, and it was probably thawed by the time she got home. So
I love it when that happens.
But I think one of the best things about ancestral food is how it lends itself to eking out bits, because that's what all of human history has pretty much been, is more or less on the brink of starvation and spending, 20 hours a day procuring your food or whatever, and just to get enough. But recipes can make it hard because you look at a recipe and you're like, I don't have that. I don't have that. But the recipe is just an example of a skill. And I feel like learning the skills is so much more important than learning the recipes, because with the skill to make, I don't know, a chowder, then you can make a chowder out of whatever you have, whatever odd, tough, leftover chunks and bits and things. or like putting together little bits and bobs of
Mm.
things,
Yeah, I agree.
just with the essential
I was
skill,
on the
you know?
Discord forum this morning, and one of our patrons from Australia, Izzy, told me that she made
Oh,
the
yeah.
risotto recipe that's coming up in our cookbook that we're
Oh, I
going to be
saw
putting
that.
out.
I saw that.
And she didn't have it's a risotto that has saffron in it, and it's well known for having saffron in it in Italy.
Yeah.
But she didn't have any
Yeah.
saffron, so she just made it without
Mhm.
saffron. And she said it was absolutely
Yeah.
delicious. I wonder what it tastes like with
I
saffron in.
bet. Yeah,
And
I saw that.
it just
Yeah.
that's a kind of a a confirmation of what you've just said. Once you've got
Mhm.
the skill of making a risotto, you've got whatever broth you've got around, you've got whatever fat
Yeah.
you've got around. That particular recipe has bone marrow in it, but you could put butter in,
Mhm.
you could put whatever fat you have around. If you've
Mhm.
got wine, put it in. If you haven't, don't worry about it.
Mhm.
Put whatever vegetables you want to put in, put whatever cheese you've got, or put
Yeah.
fish in. And it's something that you can then turn to whatever's in your fridge or
Yeah.
whatever's in your store cupboard.
Yeah. Do you remember that book, A Cabin Full of
Yeah, I
Food?
remember
I
you
think we
telling me
talked about
about
it
it. Yeah.
a couple months ago. And I like the way she does her recipes because she basically says that. She goes, "First you need, a cup of fat, tallow, lard,"
Yeah.
and she'll list off like 7 different fats that are all homemade fats or, home produced as it were.
Mm.
And she's like, "Okay, then you need something sweet, you want your fruit, you need honey, like whatever you have. Like I don't know what you have." And over time, you and your home develop like, you're like, "Oh, we really like the fermented oat baked this way
Yeah.
with this." But then somebody else might be like, "Yeah, and we prefer it with the rye,
Yeah.
like the rye pieces." Or, everybody has their specialty favorite, but they're all right.
Yeah.
They're all correct, they all heal and nourish and extract nutrients and
Did you
everything.
put that book on our new bookstore? I don't remember whether I saw it up there or not.
Which one?
The Cabin Full of
Which
Food.
one? Uh, I remember typing it
I
in. Now
think.
I don't remember if they had it or not, but I
Okay.
remember typing it in.
Okay. Well, I don't think we've
But
mentioned
that
the bookstore thing on the main podcast feed, have we? Maybe we should.
I do not remember. I remember we talked, we we talked so much and I can't remember. Was it on a Zoom call? Was it
Yeah.
on a voice memo? Was it on the kitchen table?
So we have
Yeah, yeah.
we have a way that you can buy books online without using Amazon, which for ages we thought about kind of making a little bookstore in Amazon, but both of us kind of don't want to use Amazon unless we absolutely have to. So
Yeah.
we found this wonderful company called Bookshop, and I think the URL is bookshop.org. I will put the URL in the show notes, so do check there. And we've set up our
Mhm.
own little store in there.
That's so cool.
So you can go and find all the books that we like, all the books we want to read, all the books we've read, all the books of people we've interviewed, all the books we talk about. And I'm sure that you put the Cabin Full of Food up there. The URL, I think,
Yeah.
is bookshop.org/AKP for
Mhm.
Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. That's our store. And
Wait, I'm
every
gonna
time,
type it in just to
oh,
see.
thank you. Every time you make a purchase on there, a certain percentage goes to local bookstores. That's the kind of raison d'etre behind the site, that they want to support local bookstores. So you can actually say, I want to support this bookstore that's in my town. I want them to get my money. Or you can give it to a fund which goes to all bookstores. And
Yeah.
they're a wonderful company that is working to wonderful values. And every time you purchase something through them, a little bit comes to Andrew and I and helps support the podcast as well. So
Yeah.
if you're thinking of getting books online, do go there first before you go to Amazon.
Yeah, if you're like, "Oh, I want a way to support the podcast."
Yeah.
Well, then just go get yourself a bunch of books.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, it's bookshop.org
Yeah.
/shop
Ah,
/AKP.
thank you. I missed out the
So
shop
gotta get
bit.
those both in.
Okay. And we've got a
Brian and
UK one
Lexi,
as well. I'm going to put that in the show notes because I can't remember what that URL is off by heart.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, go on.
They recorded an episode called "The Multiplication of Books" or something.
Mm.
Just talking about, the value of books in the home. And Lexi mentioned, I don't remember who, somebody had said it was important to support the local bookstores because at a local bookstore, you usually have a reader running the store who's
Mm.
obsessively drawing in and curating, pulling in, good literature and classics and modern and things like that. And she said a lot of the big chains make the most of their money off of cheap like thrillers and
Yeah.
romances and, just the books that sell by the mass. And she said it's so much more important to support the booksellers that are bringing good reading
Yeah.
to the fore.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought that was a good point. I never thought about that way.
That's completely true. I mean, I'm really fussy with my books. I've bought or started to read so many books and stopped because I just.
Oh, yeah.
So I agree. Support the good
Well,
writing.
yeah, you gotta be choosy.
Yeah, it's hard to be
Brian
choosy
made the
sometimes.
depressing statement that, I realize I'm gonna die with most of the good books unread. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, thanks. But yeah, there's no time to waste on a
Yeah, and a bad
garbage
book. I agree.
books.
If you're
There's
reading a
so
book
many
and
good
you
ones
don't
out
like it, stop reading it. Don't carry on.
there. Mhm.
Anyway, we're not supposed to be
Yeah,
talking about.
unless it's Pride and Prejudice, then
Then
you're
carry
just
on.
wrong and you need to keep going.
Yeah. Then read it again and again and again. Oh.
Exactly. Read it
Let's
until you like it.
let's talk about what we're supposed to be talking about today.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do
So
it.
this is an episode that several patrons people have asked us for, and yeah,
Many people.
it's something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, and finally got to it. We're going to talk today about fertility, and you may think that this episode is kind of only relevant if you're thinking of having a child or want to have a child, but that is not the case. And Andrea, you do really well describing why fertility is so much more than something you should be looking to hone if you want to have a child. So could you step in and explain it really nicely for me?
Yeah. Well, I think that just saying alone, Alison, that if you think this episode would only apply to you if you want to have children is a direct illustration of the way our culture has gone, which is to almost virtually despise fertility in many ways, like especially natural human fertility, and convince everyone to suppress it as much and for as long as possible, which is interesting. Um, but fertility is that fifth vital sign. It is literally the peak indication of health to be fertile. And a healthy human would be fertile as long as possible, whether or not you were, planning to have children, because it's just an indication of every organ and hormone functioning correctly and in synchronicity. And of course, we have examples of animals that are in captivity and stuff that won't
Yeah.
reproduce or can't, and you think, well, there's something wrong there, so similar for humans.
Yeah.
Was that what? I
Yeah,
don't remember
that's
if
what I
that was what
wanted you to
I
say,
was going
that
to
it
say.
just
Yeah.
basically, it's a sign of a body working correctly during that
Yeah.
stage of a life when we are fertile. The
Which
fact
is a
that we
stage
are.
that should be longer
Yeah.
than most people in our modern day think too.
Yeah. And I think some of the symptoms that come with fertility, that a lot
Right.
of women experience, can be unpleasant, and so it's
Yeah.
kind of easy to want to kind of push it away and think, well, doctors' interventions and the contraceptive pill and all these other things that can take away pain, are something that are heaven sent. But the truth of it is, if our bodies are fertile and showing signs that they're fertile, it means that we are healthy. It means that our metabolism is working. It means that our body's in a healthy state, healthy enough to feel comfortable enough to produce a child, which is where we should be as humans. So, yeah.
I mean, it's bizarre to think that generation after generation of chemically suppressing fertility could not have an effect on us ultimately. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to think that that couldn't have an impact.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the modern medical kind of view of this and the view that's passed on to young women is so wrong. And maybe I could move on to my kind of fertility story here and bring that in, because it was a huge part
let's
of
do that.
what happened to me earlier on in my life. So I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. I think when I was about 14, my periods had started before then, and they were really heavy and really irregular. And I was overweight then, very overweight. And I struggled a lot with my periods. And being brought up in a kind of a mainstream household, I went to the doctor, and the doctor just put me on the pill, the combined pill.
Oh my
Didn't
gosh. How old
explain
were
to
you?
me. I think I was 14. Didn't
Whoa.
explain to me anything about what polycystic ovaries was. Didn't offer any explanation of how I might be able to work with it myself. Didn't say to me, you're obese. And, you're obese. Do you think perhaps your weight is playing into this? Because all of the research on PCOS says the symptoms are worse when you're carrying more weight. The doctor just put me on the pill, and I just took the pill because it's what the doctor said. And my periods came, but they were obviously not proper periods because I was on the pill, and they were regular and they weren't painful. And so I just, carried on like that. And I think, that's a kind of a symptom of what the mainstream world thinks of fertility, the value that it holds it in, that I would just be given that and no questions asked at all.
Just turn it off.
Exactly.
No thought for, the side effects, the long-term effects of those medications
what was
are
happening to my body,
shockingly bad.
And I, looking back at that period of my life, obviously I wish I'd never taken the pill, but I didn't know any different, and the people around me didn't know any different. So,
of course,
the contraceptive pill is just a terrible thing for a human body, and also for the hormones going into our world, into our water system.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't have bad periods anymore, and that I carried on with the pill through most of my teenage years. And then I remember wanting to come off it in my 20s and coming off of it for a while, going back on it sort of off and on in my early 20s. And then I decided to stop completely, and my periods just stopped. I didn't have any periods at all.
So you probably actually hadn't had a period for a long time, though, because like you said, you're not actually having a period when you're on a pill and, you take the sugar pill or whatever for 3 days. Like, it's not actually a period.
Yeah, exactly. So I probably hadn't ovulated.
You don't even know how long.
And since like when I was 14 at that point. And I think, I'm trying to think how old I was when I stopped the pill. I think I was probably, the time that I stopped it for Nephilim, I think I was about 27. So
wow, so for over 10 years
I took
you
the
were
pill for
taking
over a
it.
decade. Yeah. It's
That's
horrible thinking about
mind-blowing.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
Wow.
yeah,
And never thinking, like,
well, I didn't know any different.
nobody said.
No one said anything to me, and I didn't.
Exactly.
I read mainstream media. I didn't have anyone who even kind of tinkled a little bit of that in my ear to make me curious.
Wow.
It was only really my own research later that made me think, hang on a minute, I think perhaps this isn't such a good thing for me. So yeah, when I came off the pill, I didn't have a cycle for a long time. And I then remember having kind of one cycle every couple of years, and my hormones were just a complete, incomplete topsy-turvy. And
and probably nobody saying, hey,
no,
that should be an alarming sign.
No. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I don't have a period. Well, it's not. I didn't feel like I was missing out particularly, because periods were pain and inconvenience, and I wasn't
pain and
having
inconvenience is to be avoided at all costs in our society.
Exactly. So we fast forward to probably 10 years later, when I now I'm with Rob and I'm getting into my late 30s and realising that I want to have a child if at all possible. And I had, at that point, I hadn't had a cycle for, I think, about 4 years at all, like nothing. And as we've talked about on previous episodes, that kind of coincided with me going vegetarian and then eating vegan and raw vegan at that time. I'd lost all the weight by then. I lost the weight when I was 21, so that happened long before. And I decided to go back to the doctor, and I said to the doctor, you know, I want to potentially have a child, and I haven't had a cycle for 4 years. And the doctor said to me, you will not get your cycle back without medication. And it was a lady doctor.
And he didn't?
It was a lady doctor.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
And she looked at me and she just looked at me. That was it. End of the conversation. You will not get your cycle back without medicine. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but basically outwardly, I just kind of smiled. Inwardly, in my head, there was a loud voice that said, yes, I will. And that was the beginning of my decision that I had to find an alternative, because I wasn't going to go back on any form of medication. I didn't want to take any form of medication.
Kind of a good thing she said that to you, because it fueled your determination. Maybe if she was ambivalent, you might not have been so fired. But she didn't say to you, how many years has it been since you've had fat? You know, how, like, nothing about your diet? Nothing at all?
No, nothing at all.
Probably she thought, well, you're thin, so you're healthy. So no need to question that.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Because that's another myth, you know, in our culture. Oh,
thin equals healthy. You know? Yeah. So I started trying to research what traditionally fertility foods were. And at the same time, Rob and I kind of came to a decision one New Year's Eve, having a very sort of deep, meaningful conversation together, that we really did want to have a child, but that we were not willing to go through any form of intervention to do that. So that basically meant we would bring my cycle back naturally if we could, and we would conceive naturally if we could. And if we couldn't, which I had no idea at that point whether I could, being that I hadn't had a cycle for 4 years, if we couldn't, we would accept the very hard to accept fact that we would never be parents. And that was an incredibly hard kind of decision to acknowledge. I think we both knew we felt it, but saying it out loud was quite hard. But then that kind of spurred me into even more, right, okay, I'm going to do whatever I can. And so I remember first researching traditional fertility foods and finding Alyssa Vitti, who has a clinic in New York. She still has one, but she's expanded greatly. And since then, when I found her, which was almost a decade ago, she was working on a smaller basis. And I started learning from her about the importance of animal foods and saturated fat in fertility. And I started then, through her, I found Weston Price, and I was starting to read articles from the Weston Price Foundation on traditional fertility foods. And at the same time, I found another guy who I believe was called Matt Stone, who I learnt about the importance of body temperature. And I started tracking my body temperature and seeing that I was too cold and how my metabolism wasn't working properly, and learning that if my metabolism wasn't working properly, it wouldn't allow me to ovulate, because my body would think that there was something wrong.
Did you know we have a Patreon for the listeners of the Ancestral Kitchen podcast? That's right, can't get enough of this? Well, there's more of it over on the Patreon feed, just waiting for you. We have a variety of levels to choose from and a bunch of different benefits to enjoy. Your sponsorship keeps the podcast on the air ad-free and helps us keep buying books to read and talk about on the podcast. And also helps Alison buy bizarre ingredients at the farmer's market so she can ferment them and tell us about them later. Check us out at patreon.com/ancestralkitchenpodcast.
So that was a period of about kind of a year where I just learnt all about traditional fertility foods and started bringing them back into my diet. And after a period of, it took quite a while because I was raw vegan at the time. And so to reintroduce eggs, fish, meat, fat, raw dairy, it was hard psychologically. But over about a year, I brought them fully back into my diet. And then I think about 18 months into it, I had a period for the first time in 5 years. It had been 5 years at that point. And then I was pregnant before my next period happened. So I was pregnant on my second ovulation.
Amazing.
Which
Amazing.
was unbelievable to me because I didn't even know if I was going to have a second period because I spent most of my life having one period, then waiting a year for the next one.
Yeah. So you could have thought this one was, this is my, biannual period. Nothing to see here.
I couldn't believe it. And then I realized, no, actually, I'm pregnant. And since then, obviously, I didn't menstruate when I was pregnant with Gabriel. But since I've given birth to Gabriel and returned back and to a cycle, my cycles have been regular, completely.
That's awesome.
And that's been, Gabriel's 8 now. I've never had a period in my life, a block of time in my life where I've had a regular cycle, other than after Gabriel, other than, after I found ancestral food.
Yeah. And can you say again, when you started eating the ancestral food, how long it took before you got your cycle back?
I think it took about a year to 18 months. I started slowly.
Okay.
So at the beginning, when I was just doing that work with Elisaviti's clinic and learning, I should be including some animal foods. Because I'd been more vegan, I was just like, perhaps some eggs and perhaps a little bit of salmon, because those were the things that I'd liked the most before I had decided to eat vegan. So I started with those and I kind of slowly went back into for that. Then I slowly introduced some raw dairy. I remember making kefir with a local raw milk. And then I slowly introduced a bit of meat. And then we moved more onto the fatty things, which were more a challenge for me because of my history of being obese.
Right.
Then we moved on to cheese. Then we moved on to, really roasted pork joints with all the fat on them, Then we moved on to proper saturated fat. So it took me probably about a year to get all that back into my diet and get eating it regularly. But the encouragement I found when I watched my body temperature change was astounding.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It really,
I'm just picturing you as like a thermal map, and I could just see you warming up as you're eating those foods.
It was literally astounding. I would take my temperature, and I began to learn what my normal temperature was in the morning and what it was like in the lunchtime and what it was like in the evening. And then I would watch myself. I was about 1.5 degrees centigrade, that is lower than what I should have been.
Wow.
And I was always warmer in the morning and colder in the evening, whereas you should be the other way around. You should be
That's interesting.
warmer in the evening. I always cooled down during the day, whereas Rob did the opposite. He's more normal. He warmed up. And I would take my temperature after, like I'd eaten roast pork for lunch in the evening. I would take my temperature, and it would be 1 degree warmer, literally, from just eating a big meal with the fat of the animal included in the meal.
Yeah.
And so seeing that, I started to think, hey, well, I can understand, if your body temperature is not what a human's body temperature is supposed to be, if it's too cold, then your systems aren't going to work properly. Your body's
Of
going to
course.
think,
Yeah.
there's something wrong here. I am not going to ovulate.
Everything's
We can't bring
slow.
another child into this world if this is the
No, we'll
environment
all
it's going to
starve
be
to
in.
death.
Exactly, we'll starve.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of similar with
Yeah.
eating too little. Eating too little depresses your metabolism, depresses your temperature, and the body's
Yeah.
not going to allow a child into the world when there's not enough food. So it all kind of clicked in my head. And yeah, it happened really quite quickly. Once I brought that food back in fully, then I think it was like 6 months after I was eating like that I had a cycle.
It's amazing.
So
And probably good that you did go kind of slowly into it because in a way, if you had changed all at once, it might have been taxing. It's a big change, a lot for your digestive system to handle having real food all of a sudden, like that. So,
yeah, I agree. And also for your psychology,
mhm.
I was very, for most of my life, I'd been very anti-fat, and so I needed time to accept that this
Yeah.
was what I wanted to do now, and
Yeah.
so that time was good for me to not go into complete overdrive in my head too.
Yeah. And the change came in more permanent, obviously, as you're still doing it,
Exactly.
years later. But that's a good thing too.
Yeah. So the traditional fertility foods that I researched and brought back into my diet, and what people
Let's talk
say
about that.
are the traditional fertility foods. So the first one is saturated fat, and obviously that has to be good quality saturated fat. We know that, for instance, pigs can be kept in appalling conditions in big pig factories and fed unnatural food for pigs. And the fat from those pigs that have been genetically engineered to be leaner in the first place is not good quality saturated fat.
It's not the same thing.
Really, in the world I inhabit, the only way to afford good quality saturated fat is to make it yourself. Butter is expensive and difficult to live on as your only saturated fat because of its cost. So we're back to the kind of the thing we shout from the rooftops in every podcast: find a farmer, find someone who is looking after animals and soil near you, and go ask them if you can have some fat. It doesn't take long to render fat in bulk in your kitchen, and it is so cheap compared to buying it. So cheap.
Yeah, because nobody else wants it.
Yeah, completely.
If you find a great source of pork or beef and you're like, can I buy some unrendered fat? They'll be like,
take it.
You want a what?
Yeah. Take it. So yeah,
that's true.
That's the saturated fat, I think, is the cornerstone to traditional fertility foods. The second one, which is really important, is eggs. And I think if you read any book like Nourishing Traditions or anything the Western Price have put out, you'll read how women, before they have children, while they're looking after children, while they're breastfeeding, just after, postpartum, they eat a lot of eggs.
Okay, can I read this part? Actually, Alison, I have it open on the table in front of me. It's funny you said it because I was like, I want to read this part because there's something in here that there's a principle she states that is so important. And this is why everybody, men and women, should be eating their ancestral diet now, whether or not they are planning, to have children or now in the next 6 months or in years from now. Choline is especially important for the formation of cholinergic neurons, which takes place from day 56 of pregnancy through 3 months after birth. When choline is lacking, these connections cannot take place. Adding choline to the diet in later years will not compensate for missing choline during growth. The window of opportunity when the body is programmed to make these connections will have closed. Now, listen to this. The mother's intake of choline, lots of choline, can have a beneficial effect for the entire life of her offspring.
Wow.
And then they cite just something they observed in rats. Rats fed 3 times the normal choline requirement during pregnancy give birth to offspring with remarkably resilient nervous systems. These offspring have a lifelong 30% increase in visual, spatial, and auditory memory. They grow old without developing any age related senility. They are protected against the assaults of neurotoxins, and they have an enhanced ability to focus on several things at once. The RDA for non pregnant women is 425 milligrams of choline per day. For pregnant women, it's just 450 more. However, rat studies suggest an amount 2 to 3 times more may provide your baby with lasting benefits. And it's important to note that women need to be getting these foods long before they're pregnant, because when you are pregnant, one of two things can happen. One, even if you're supplementing with something, it might be too late to get it into your system. The baby needed it built into you before. And the other is, if you don't have it, the baby in some cases can steal it from your system and you'll end up deficient, at the expense of, keeping the new life alive.
Yeah, that's a really
But
important
egg
point, and
whites,
something that we've got a question on that is later.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Go on about egg
So I'm
whites.
just going to read one last sentence, and that is egg whites provide perfect protein, and egg yolks contain a powerhouse of nutrients, chief among them being choline, which is critical for the development of the brain. And I'm thinking, I wish I had my old phone down here, because I had taken notes on a talk Joel Salatin gave on the difference of nutrients in the eggs from his pasture raised chickens versus the eggs from the factory. And I'm telling you, Alison, they're not even the same food. I want to say the folic acid or the folic, the difference in folate. Wow, now I can't even remember. Was it folate? Am I getting it right, Alison? Was like over 1,000 units of measurement different. I mean, it was off the chain. And I took it down in my notes, but that's in the old phone that's upstairs.
Can we link the talk in the show notes if people want to look it up?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I just read was from the first chapter of the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care, with Sally Fallon Morrell and Thomas Cowan. I think, Alison, I linked that episode of Joel's when we talked about chickens before, but I'll link it again.
Thank you.
People might have already listened to it if they've been listening to the episodes, though.
Yeah.
But they're not even the same food. So getting eggs from a farmer that has them on grass, because do not trust a box that says free range. That's garbage. That means nothing. Get them from a farmer that has the chickens on grass. And I know that it might be $10 a dozen, but it's not even the same food as what you're getting from the factory. It's not like that goes by the same name and it appears similar, but inside of it, it is not the same thing.
I think, slightly off on a tangent here, but I want to say it, that when we list these foods, it can be easy to think, oh, how can I afford all of this, these eggs like this? How can I afford the fat? And I remember when I was pregnant, going to the only Western Price Traditions conference in the UK that there's been, and I heard Sally Fallon talk. And in that talk, she had some slides of what she ate in a day, and she showed pictures. And I was astounded by the smallness of what was on her plate.
I was going to say.
Literally.
Yes.
All the dishes were really nutrient dense, but smaller than I expected.
Yeah.
And she's not, 4'8". I don't know if you do 4 foot.
No.
Do you do that kind of measurements in the US? She's a normal sized woman.
No, we measure in twigs, Alison. You guys weigh in stones, and we measure in twigs. So she's 12 twigs tall.
I always have to think I'm going off on one about 4'7" or ounces or grams or something. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, does Andrew know what I'm talking about?
She's 20 liters tall.
She's not a small woman. And she had her lunch was small. But when you looked at what was on the plate, it was really dense food. And I think when we are used to the amounts of foods we eat of previous diets, we think we need a massive plate with all this stuff. But when you start to feed yourself nutrient dense food, and when you start to process grains properly, you realize you don't need as much to give your body what it needs. So that
Gary
was my
said that
tangent.
when we first started eating almost exclusively off of farms when we lived in Virginia. And he said, wow, you cannot eat as much. And have you ever heard someone try to eat a piece of chocolate cake and they say it's too rich, they can't eat very much? And that's how nutrient dense food is. You just can't eat as much, but you're full, and you're full for longer. Like that chowder. I had a bowl of chowder. If I just had a bowl of cereal, I probably could have had 6 bowls of cereal and still been hungry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just does nothing it doesn't hit any of the markers in my brain or anything.
So let's.
And it's interesting, Alison, because since you're talking about fertility specifically, think about how many people will spend tens of thousands of dollars on a treatment.
Yeah.
But it would never occur to us to take out a loan to join a CSA to try and heal our body.
Yeah.
Whereas we would do that for all kinds of medical interventions.
Yeah.
I'm not saying somebody should do that. Like, I'm not saying I want you to take out a loan. I'm just saying, like,
the perspective.
we don't see it the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, carry on.
So back to our list. The next thing that I wrote down was liver. Liver's always quoted as a traditional fertility food because of the incredible nutrients that are in it. I've got oily fish, and then grains, process them. It is hard for our bodies to digest grains when they are not processed, and it takes much more digestive power. There are problems with the grains kind of not being digested properly. If you process your grains, then your body will have much less to do and you will be able to absorb them much better. The other thing that I wanted to add, which I kind of mentioned earlier, is that you need to eat enough food. We have this, long-held kind of culture of we have to be thin equals healthy, and the diet culture that all of us are saturated in. It's rubbish is the polite word, I would say, for it. And you need to have enough food to be fertile. Your body cannot think that it's in starvation mode because it won't work properly. So let's talk about kind of the reality, the practical side of these, the saturated fat, the eggs, the liver, the oily fish, processing grains. If someone wants to be as healthy as possible, as fertile as possible, and include those foods in their diet, they're busy, just like everyone is. How do you see that looking? Talk about how you include those in your kitchen.
Yeah, well, I think step number 1, you already laid out, which is ease into it. So start incorporating things into your life as opposed to trying to full sweep change. That's helpful, because once you've incorporated one thing, it becomes so normal for you that you don't even realize you're abnormal until you go to someone else's house and you're like, what are you putting in the microwave?
Microwave? They still have those.
The microwave. Yeah. So for us, definitely bulk cooking comes into play. Like when I made this chowder, it was way more than we needed for a meal, but I put we ate a meal and I put a half a gallon in the fridge because I knew we'd eat it the next day, which I just did. So bulk cooking, that's not really bulk cooking, but that's kind of like intentional overrun. As much as you can do on your own in terms of cost, usually, well, that's not true. I was going to say sometimes you have less time, but then more money. That's not always true necessarily. If that is the case, then you can outsource some of your processing and have, buy sprouted sourdough bread. But if you, it sounds so elitist if I'm like, or just stay home and like do it yourself, but in reality, that's kind of what we need to do.
Yeah. And it's not,
and I know
it's not always elitist. It is for some people if they think they're elitist because they've got the ability to do that. But for other people like you and me and like people listening to this podcast, it's a hard decision to stay at home and do this. There's only just enough, and bartering and making difficult choices is part of it, but it's wonderful too.
Exactly. And I hear the same argument in about homeschool when people say, well, only wealthy people can homeschool because the mom has to stay home. And I'm confused hearing that because growing up, every homeschool family I know was basically what they would have said poor. Because everybody said we're willing to take a hit, a huge hit. We're not going to Disneyland. We're going to the state fair. You know what I mean? We're not going to Whole Foods. We're planting a garden on our porch if need be, you know? So yeah, I guess it's not privilege. It's just like an exchange of values, basically.
Yeah, completely.
So
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So thanks for saying that. Yeah. So bulk cooking, do as much processing as you can, of course. And just pick like one book that you love, like Nourishing Traditions. There's so many out there now. I'm almost glad, Alison, that when you and I were really getting going, there was just really Nourishing Traditions, because I would be so overwhelmed. Every blog is the right one. Every social media influencer is the one you should be listening to. And they're all posting the thing you need to do, or you're like, baby's going to be born without legs or something like that. You know, if you don't eat this now, it's just a lot. But whereas when you read Nourishing Traditions, yes, she pulls out to the side and says, okay, here's a whole bunch of like, oh, here's choline and here's what it does to your neurotransmitters and here's how much you could be eating. But if you didn't know the science behind it or read the details behind it, and all you did was fully embrace the ancestral diet, you would cover all of those bases.
Yeah, completely.
And that, Sally says that a lot, that, well, through all of human history, people have said this is the way to do it. And all our research showed that's how every tribe did it. So we do it this way. And now we have this study to show why we do it this way. But we did it this way before anyways, even before we knew. And like,
that's fascinating.
In our culture, we're like, yeah, but it's like, why do I need eggs specifically? Or why, like, tell me more, like, well, or you could just, there's this popular saying nowadays, which is like, trust the science. So I'm going to throw that to the side and say, trust the ancestors.
Yeah.
They had a reason for doing it that way. Even if they didn't know the science, they'd observed over decades and generations that people did better when they did this.
Yeah.
So let's do it.
Yeah. I think the word you used of bulk is the most important thing, because we are all busy and it can be overwhelming to think about trying to include all that food in your diet. But, that, for instance, the liver pate that I was talking about when we were talking about what we just ate, when I made Naomi's liver pate, I made a lot. Like a lot. It took me quite a long time one Saturday morning, frying up all the onions, then frying up the liver, grinding the spices down. But once I'd done it, I had a ton of liver pate. I had some that we had for lunch. I had some that I left in the fridge for 3, 4, 5 days. Then I had some that I just wrapped up in parchment paper in little kind of blocks that would last us 2 days. And then I put them in the freezer. And then I'd take one out and we'd have it one day for lunch and then the next day for lunch. And
you don't have a huge... You don't have a huge chest freezer.
No, I have a tiny freezer with 3 drawers.
Worth noting.
And I think, approaching these foods with that mindset can really help. The fat rendering, the lard that we render every about 6 weeks. We get 3 kilograms of fat, we render it down, and then some of it's in the fridge, some of it's in the freezer, and it lasts us 6 weeks. We do the same with tallow.
With just... I was going to say, with just a little bit of planning, I was remembering even with our first apartment, we had a small fridge and freezer, and I am astonished at how much I prepped and bulk cooked and squeezed into that freezer. Like, in retrospect, I'm like, how did I do it? Of course, there's only 2 of us at the time, so that helped. But still, I was preparing year's supply of certain things, and like, how? I don't even know.
I think
but even
it's like when you try and fit things in your freezer, you were amazed at actually how much you could fit in. When I was doing the rye course earlier in the year, you would not believe how many rye breads I had in that freezer. I just kept pulling them out.
There's still more.
There's still more. It's only one drawer full of rye breads. It was like some Mary Poppins drawer that went on forever.
I was going to say Mary Poppins pulling it out. Yeah. But with just a little bit of planning, you can strategize
So,
even in shorter bulk.
yeah,
Like you didn't say you made a year's supply of
no,
pate, but
no,
you made a liver's supply of it, as it were.
yeah,
And then that was on your Saturday when you had time.
yeah,
And now during the week, when you're taking Gabriel to and from
yeah,
school or whatever, you're not making it.
yeah.
So
It's
that's awesome.
it's just kind of organizing logistics to make things in bulk, and it makes it much more manageable. And approaching
Yeah.
it
And
when
I
you
don't,
can, when you're in the mood for doing it, or when you feel like
yeah.
planning, you can then sort it out, so you don't have to worry about it.
And I think listen, listen to Allison. I'll say listen to me too, but listen to Allison because I and with I listen to you, Allison,
Mm,
with trust and confidence because there are um social media influencers who will share with you the ancestral meal they made and talk about how important it is and all those things. But then they're also that's not every single meal. And then they're also having things delivered and things like that. Like they're you're telling us it's important and it's worth sacrificing for. And I'm saying the same thing. And
mm,
we both are.
mm,
Not just saying that,
yeah.
like for the sake of clicks or whatever.
And
Like
sometimes
this is our life.
sometimes that bulk thing, that liver pate's ready, and I've made the bread in bulk as well. I make more than one bread at a time
Yeah.
and freeze it. But then sometimes, literally, it's the bread, the liver pate's ready, and then I haven't got time to do something else. So I've cut up some
Hmm.
carrots, torn off a couple of
Hmm.
lettuce leaves, ripped them up with my hands, put them on the plate.
Yeah.
It's not
Boom.
it's not
Done.
all absolutely perfect and looking wonderful. It's just
Oh, that does sound perfect, actually.
it's a
But
mix. It's a mix of
yeah,
preparation
exactly.
and flexibility, and also we've talked
Yeah.
before about accepting that there's not necessarily the variety that you're going to see in ideal people's kitchens where they have different meals every single night of the
Right.
week.
Yeah.
Sometimes we eat the same thing over
Sorry,
and
that's
over
not
again.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And if you have, I can say this from experience as well, both in community living with multiple adults or living with big family, lots of kids. If you have a lot of variety like that, every meal is different. It's probably a result of either grocery shopping, so somebody else is doing, prep of some things, or when you're in a community, you're going to tear through the food a lot faster, but there's more hands to
mm,
prepare.
mm,
So automatically, you end up with diverse food. So
yeah.
if you have 7 kids and you're thinking, yeah, we know what are leftovers? Never seen them in my life. Then that makes sense. You probably, hopefully, are training. I'm sure you are training up those kids, and you've got more hands
Yeah.
helping you in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Hence, more diversity on the plate.
Yeah. We've got some questions that came in for this episode, but before we
Okay.
get to those, let's just talk briefly about other things aside from food. Do you want to talk a bit about toxins and other things that can influence fertility?
Yeah, I'll make it short since
Mm,
I know we've talked about this before. Um, so important as you're inputting all the good to stop inputting the bad that's negatively affecting us. And one of the things that affects us the most in our environment today is xenoestrogens, which is the Greek for, xeno, like a stranger, foreign, estrogen like. So they bind to your estrogen or receptors that would accept estrogen, and they act like estrogen, but they're not estrogen. And that's a problem for male and female because you end up with estrogen dominant male and female, which is for neither of us, that's not a good thing.
mm,
So, what are xenoestrogens found in? Literally everything in our modern world. Of course, they're man made, like everything else wonderful. They're in laundry soap, they're in water, they're in all kinds of foods and meats. They're in yeah, Alison, they're in receipts.
mm,
They're in everything. So do you just live your life in fear, cowering under your organic grass-fed wool blanket? Or do you eliminate and then you give yourself a new problem. Now you're basically living off of cortisol and adrenaline,
Yeah.
like pick
Yeah.
your poison. So you do need to live in the real world, but you're able to avoid a lot of them. So anything that says fragrance, I promise you, there's xenoestrogens in it. If your laundry soap has essential oils in it, and then after you wash and dry your clothes, they smell so strongly of that essential oil, then that wasn't just an essential oil, it was an essential oil bound with a xenoestrogen to the fabric. And it's like, what's the point then? Why
Mm,
did you use essential oils in the laundry soap if you're just gonna bind it with a xenoestrogen?
mm,
Um, what you can eliminate, basically anything from like a drugstore, like the shampoos and laundry soaps and things like that,
mm.
deodorants. It's a lot. I mean, it's another thing, kind of like the food, Allison, where you can. I mean, I do know plenty of people who just said, you know what, clean sweep, I'm getting rid of everything. They fill a trash bag with everything and they just get it out and they start over.
Mm,
And then there's other people, this is more closer to what we did, where you're like, okay, I know this is bad. I'm going to finish it and I'm replacing it as it's
mm.
gone with something good. That is an option too. So I have, for the patrons, I'm going to upload an extra bonus from a workshop that we've taught out here,
Mm.
which is just on avoiding xenoestrogens. So it's just the handout that I give at that workshop. So the top 10 most common sources of xenoestrogens,
Okay.
things you can focus on swapping out and avoiding. If you are getting rid of all the fragranced bodily things, and and plugins, please get rid of the plugins and candles, and you're eating as closely as you can off of farms that don't use synthetic input for their animals, you're probably avoiding the grand bulk of it. What do you think, Allison?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very easy to become stressed about it and
Yeah,
too
a
fundamental.
new
That
hyperfixation.
that's my kind of tendency. So I'm always aware if
Really?
yeah, can you tell? Um, so I'm always aware. I look back and I think about how I've done that in my life, and like you
Yeah,
said, you're just swapping one thing. You're swapping that for cortisol and adrenaline, which aren't going to do your system any good
right,
themselves. So it's about being
right.
kind and finding what you can do without becoming too obsessed by it. I think that's kind of the same with stress generally in our life. I mean, so many people will tell us that stress is not good for us and we must look after ourselves. We must do self-care in
Blah, blah,
quotes.
blah.
And the point is, we can only do what we can do, but we can consciously direct our thoughts and direct our actions to being
Yes,
kinder to ourselves. I think all of us know deep down what we need in order to look after ourselves, in order to have that self-care. And
true.
I remember being quite taken aback a few years ago. I did a songwriting course, and part of that had several exercises in it, and one of them said, finish this phrase 10 ways. And the phrase started, secretly, I'd love to. And you had to write 10 ways you wanted to finish that. And I remember thinking at the
Whoa.
time, that was really helpful to me, because deep down, we all know what we want to do, what we'd love to do if there
Yeah,
was more time, if we
yeah.
had more money, if I didn't have all these other things to do, if this person wasn't watching me. And some of those things have an essence that we do need to bring closer to us. And if we become
Yeah,
aware of those knowledges we have in us, then we can try to direct the time and space and money that is available to just giving ourselves a little bit more of what we need. So I think that's my
absolutely.
That's my tuppence on. Do you say tuppence? I don't know if I'm allowed to ask that anymore. That's my
No,
tuppence.
we don't say tuppence, Alison.
That's my 2 cents. Okay, that's my 2 cents on self-care.
Now that's some American capitalism right there.
Oh, do you want to add anything on self-care?
we don't do self-care in America. I'm just kidding. No, I think you covered.
Okay.
You covered it.
Cool. Let's move on to the questions.
So we had a couple questions. Do you want to try and hit those?
Yeah. So I'll ask you the first one. Do you recommend supplements?
I recommend get it from your food, and maybe if you know you're excessively deficient in something, build yourself up with that supplement. And my only 100% of the time, all the time, thing I could call a supplement is Ningxia, which is just a whole food. So I don't even know. It's just something I can't grow here. So
that's what we've talked about before. Really, whole food as supplements is much more our kind of thing than supplements. But really, food can provide everything if you can get the right types of food grown in the right types of way. So
do you say an egg is a supplement? I don't know. I don't think so, but it's supplementing what you need.
It's delicious. That's what I call an egg.
It's delicious.
I didn't take any supplements when preparing. I just ate really good food. Okay, so the next question is, what about the man? We haven't talked about men in specific really terms here. Does he need to do all of this? And I mean, I remember the reading that I did, that the man's just as important as the woman when it comes to being fertile and being able to produce a healthy offspring. So, I mean, Rob did everything that I did. We did our kind of transition into ancestral foods together. And I think it's easy to think that everything is on the weight of the shoulders of the woman, but the man needs to pay just as much attention to his diet and what's not going into his body and his life as well. And
he really with the woman, it is true, but we tend to not think about it. With the man, it's more obvious that his input is largely coming in through coding that he's passing on to the child, which is all set in stone before the child's, eyes develop, if you will. So it's the same with the woman. And then she also supplements the physical growth of the child, but they both are contributing coding. So knowing that both of you are preparing that coding right now, if you ever want to have a child, even 10 years from now, and then as for men's fertility, I don't know so much about that, but I do know that men are also facing a crisis and they're also suffering massively under these estrogenic overloads. Maybe in some ways more so than women, I don't know. But the good thing though is with ancestral food, you pretty much can prepare the same thing. And like Tara Couture often posts pictures of her plate and his plate, and they do eat differently, but they prepare the same things. And then like he will pull more of the veg. She doesn't eat as much of the vegetables as he does, or he'll eat like twice as much as she does, but it's the same plate.
That's similar to Rob and I. Rob will eat more vegetables than me.
Yeah.
And
same with Gary and me. Weird.
That was quite a difficult thing to kind of come to terms with for me, because the vegetables are good, you've got to eat your veg, and eating less vegetables in order to have enough room for me to eat the stuff that was more nutrient dense was a learning curve for me.
Yeah.
I think what we said at the beginning about fertility being a sign of good health is just as true of men as it is of women. The same steps that will make a man fertile are the steps that will make a man healthy and able to express himself in the world. So,
and feeling good.
Yeah.
I wonder if, I was going to say, don't typically men keep their fertility longer, but I wonder if that's just the fact that our infradian rhythms and our hormones are, I don't want to be reductionist about men, but ours are, maybe I could say the word more complicated. That's probably not true, but maybe females' hormones are more delicately thrown off balance. And I wonder if realistically, women should also be keeping their fertility as long as men on average do, but we just don't because our system suffers more. I don't know.
That's something that requires some investigation on my part to be able to.
And
It's fascinating.
it's more common to see a woman taking on a masculine role, whether she
Yeah,
chooses to or not, than to see a
yeah,
man taking on a feminine role. Like you'll see, yeah, like that's just more common.
yeah.
So
I agree.
yeah, I wonder. Anyways,
Next question: are there any ancestral foods to avoid? What would you say to that one?
don't know. Good question. I know Sally Fallon says, well, people say don't eat sushi when you're pregnant, but what do you think the women in Japan eat?
Yep.
So I don't know.
I didn't avoid any foods when I was pregnant. I could say that.
Neither did I.
Um,
Literally nothing. But I knew my sources.
yeah,
So it wasn't like I had to question if it was coming from the grocery store and it was bad. I knew I was pretty much the one preparing it and I knew the farm it came from.
yeah,
So
yeah. That's far more important, I think. Okay, next question is
yeah.
quite interesting. As women age and are in their mid to late 30s, does any advice change? So I had Gable when I was almost 40. So my periods came back to me. I was pregnant when I was 38. When I was 38, I think actually it was the month that I turned 38 that my periods returned. So I was well into my mid to late 30s by the time I regained my fertility. And I just followed the same advice as would be given to someone, to a woman who was in their 20s, the same advice that traditional ancestral peoples have given to all of their women. So I don't think anything changes as you age. But I haven't done any specific research on that. But I think the basic tenets are exactly the same. What do you think about that, Andrea?
Well, I think the diet generally would probably stay the same with probably some reducing in quantity since, especially when you're, young and farming, you're burning through
Yeah.
a ton. But or breastfeeding or carrying babies if you do either of those. Um, Lexi has been telling me about some really interesting books she's been reading, and I wrote down the 2 titles, Alison,
Oh,
and they're
great.
on the note card upstairs on my desk.
Oh.
Oh, why did I leave it up there? I picked up the headphones right next to it and left it sitting there. But how about I jot them down in the show notes?
Yeah,
But
please.
she has been learning about some of herbs and things that women can continue to take that traditionally they would drink, as teas or tinctures or whatever, bathe in, steam with, or whatever, um, as they progress through the years. So
So
I
maybe
will.
there's support that you can give your
Those,
body as you get
I
older.
believe there
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we put.
And just remembering that
Mhm.
we live slightly out of our human context most of the time. So that might be important. Like most of us aren't waking up because the sun rolled onto our face and then going to bed because the sun went down behind the hill. Like we're living with lights and um, blue screens and computers and things that affect our thyroid and stuff like that.
I
So
think for me, as I've got older, it's harder for me to abuse myself, and so
amen.
the
Amen.
looking at wanting to be fertile in mid late 30s, maybe into 40s, the things like self-care become much more strict because I can't treat myself now
Absolutely.
as I could when I was 21. I don't have the resilience. And so
No, I wish I'd treated myself
yeah, I wish I
when
treated
I was
myself.
21 like I
Yeah,
am now.
completely. I agree. But it then becomes you just have to pay more attention at the older you get because you can't.
Yeah.
You notice the cues more quickly, and you have to pay more attention to them. I would add to that.
And that's because and I always think about it in the ancestral way. I think, well, but why? And that's because you're supposed to be able to take a beating during those years. It's hard work raising a small family and, or raising, I should say, a young family.
Mm,
Um, and then taking care of elders at the same time,
mm,
probably, and then working in fields and, just seeing what our husbands do, Allison,
mm,
physically,
mm,
is just insane. And so we should be able to take those hard hits, but we abuse that privilege of humans being able to take hits, and we starve ourselves, we binge on alcohol,
Yeah.
we overwork in the wrong areas, we ignore bodily needs, we suppress, signs of red flags and things
I'm
like that.
talking about my 20s when you make that long list.
Yeah, yeah. I was spared, lots of toxic inputs like alcohol binges and things, thankfully, because it just wasn't part of my culture personally. But um, I abused myself in many other ways. I starved myself, I would go days, up to 5 days at a time without eating anything, which is ridiculous, like ridiculous. Now, we were driving home last night from jujitsu, and I was like, "Oh, we have to go home so I can get, I need to eat a piece of cheese right away." And the kids were like, "Why?" And I was like, "Because now I can tell,
Yeah.
like that is starting, like not." Now I'm paying attention and realizing, oh my gosh, when you see those warning signs, if you take care of them right away, they don't get worse.
Yeah, completely. Oh, okay. One more question, which is a never-ending question. And this one was from Rebecca in Australia, one of our patrons. And she asked, how much of your past eating habits affect your pregnancy and child's health?
Yeah.
And that...
Do we want to know?
Yeah, well, exactly. That is quite scary when you've lived differently to how you would have wished to have lived, because I think really all of our past eating habits affect pregnancy and our child's health. I think my eating habits when I was a teenager probably have affected Gabriel's health. But again, that's another kind of area where you just have to let go and say, well, I am where I am. I am where I am now, and I know what I know now, and I move forward from here with the best steps that I can. Because
forgive yourself, forgive your parents. Maybe your parents didn't do what you wished they had done when they were pregnant with you, and it's maybe something I considered when I saw this question was there's probably been very few, if any, pregnancies in history that were completely ideal. Like we're facing, I alcohol binged in my 20s and starved myself and threw my system way out of whack, and had to fight to get my fertility back, and was probably just starting to get the right amount of choline when I got pregnant. Okay, so that's what we're facing. Whereas somebody else is like, yeah, we didn't eat for like 3 years, and there was a famine, and then there was a fire, and then there was a flood, and people through history faced problems too. Let's not fantasize that they all were just like swimming in eggs and broth and had everything they needed. And the astounding resiliency of the body, both your body to cannibalize itself to help your child get the best of the best, motherhood beginning right out the gate, and the infant's body to recover from certain things and rebuild some things. As we saw in Sally's book, some things like they just aren't going to change, but other things we can work with. So we must forgive ourselves, as all humans everywhere must.
And just
and
do our best.
Do what we can with what we know now.
Do our best. Exactly. So resources-wise, I think the Weston A. Price Foundation has a lot of articles online. All of their previous journal articles are online. So you can search with them in the search term, and you'll find a lot of articles on fertility. Also, if you want to talk to us further, do come and join us at the companionship level or above on Patreon, because we've got our Discord forum, and if you've got more questions, we're on there regularly. You can quiz us or quiz the other patrons, because there's a lot of people with knowledge on there. So
oh my gosh, like, did you see what Kelsey said about the iron? Hello, thank you, Kelsey. Like, yes, please. That was so helpful. I was like, I know there's something weird about it, and then she's like, "Let me break it down for you." I was like, "This is awesome."
And that's what we, that in that
really
community, that's what we want, where people come in with the things that we don't know and they know and they've studied and we haven't, and it's a big kind of sharing. So that's available if people want to come over to Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Fun.
I trust the Western Price Foundation on fertility completely. So if you want to go and do some reading,
They've got the receipts.
go and find
Not the xenoestrogen kind.
no, exactly. Go and find their website and search through their blogs. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've probably gone on quite some time. I can't see the counter on my recorder, but I think it's probably time to stop.
What a ride. What a time to be alive.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you ever so much.
You have an amazing story, Alison. Thank you for all the details you've shared with us over the episodes of your very personal story. And I know it's helpful to so many of us.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space too. I appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to say goodbye then and go and have my egg for tea.
Until next time. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at Ancestral_Kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.